Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us. My name is Nick. I am the co-founder and CEO at a very new startup called Thrif. In a past life, I helped organize this awesome meetup, and I spent a bit of time at Google myself. But the topic for today is actually centered around Thrif, this new startup that myself and some co-founders / colleagues in the crowd are trying to build. And initially I called it building an AI-driven inventory management system using AppSheet and Gemini. To be honest, in hindsight, it should have been prototyping. So I've corrected it here on the slide. But yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit today about some of the Google tools that we used in the early stages of developing some of the parts of Thrif. So to give you a little introduction to Thrif, I'm not going to go too deep into it. This is the first slide of our investment pitch deck. So if you are an investor, come to me afterwards. It'd be nice to talk to you. But really, Thrif is an AI-driven marketplace for buying and selling basically secondhand fashion with a slightly different business model in that we're a managed marketplace. So what does that mean? And how does Thrif really work? So in a nutshell, sellers, people with secondhand clothes they no longer need or aren't wearing anymore, or businesses with stock overflow, will sign up with us via a form in order to send us kits which contain items. These kits arrive at our physical warehouse where our staff members then attach barcoded tags to these items and then use our custom-built app to achieve a few different things, namely inventory management, barcode scanning, quality control, photography of the items themselves, and listing the items online. So the app has quite a few features that it needs. The app then communicates directly with our database of all the secondhand items that we receive, which is then basically reflected on both our e-commerce websites where people can shop for things and buy, as well as what we call a seller dashboard, which is really just a view for sellers to see the items that they've sent us, what's sold, what hasn't, cash out, etc. It's quite a big diagram, but today we're mostly just going to be focusing on these technical parts for the talk. So before we get into the technical parts, I do just want to preface that given these requirements, which are quite big, to be honest, for an early stage business that's still trying to prove its concept, find money, scrap things together, etc. It's a lot. So there were certainly some constraints that we needed to be aware of when choosing what technology to use, given all the breadth of choices you get nowadays. Firstly, time was definitely a constraint. We're moving fast. We're attempting to prove our concept as fast as possible. We can't really spend ages building the perfect thing. Capital is certainly a constraint as well. We don't yet have the budget to pay the most senior engineers and hire massive teams and all of that, or perhaps even pay for the most expensive tools. We're also a small team. We're 2 founders, 2 people in the product and tech side, and then 2 people in the warehouse. It's very small right now. It's also worth noting that from our collective backgrounds, there were certainly some skill gaps. That diagram I showed you before was quite complex. It requires perhaps knowledge in back-end, front-end, warehouse operations, staff management, like inventory management. There's a lot there. So acknowledging that we had gaps in our skill sets is certainly something that we thought about in the beginning. And certainly when it comes to building an online marketplace at scale, we needed to select things wisely. And speaking of scale, the business model itself only really works at scale. There's a certain business model that we have, which I'll go into now, but yeah, the truth is the only way for it to make a huge impact, and for us to be a successful business, is if we process thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of secondhand items and manage to sell them at the same time. Because we use a consignment model. And also, as I was saying before, like part of our goal at Thrift is actually not only to sell as much as we can, but to process and do something with it as much of the items as we can in order to make a difference. And that being said as well, because things only work at scale, and because we've got this whole like physical operation going on, speed, efficiency, and automation were really key. And it was at this point, I guess, that we sort of realized we could have an opportunity to both blend our physical operations and human work with software and AI. Last thing to mention, to be honest, from the beginning, we set up a startup, we bought a domain, we needed email addresses, we fully committed to Google Workspace. It's just one of the early choices that we made. And that also drove quite a bit of the decision making in terms of like what pieces of technology we chose for what I'm about to show you. So the first thing, that thing where sellers come through to us and like sign up to be a seller, to start off with this, super simple. It's literally just a Google form. That's it for now, at least. I just want to note this because like this is sort of the entry point when someone signs up to sell, and this is what we currently use. And probably will be using for the foreseeable future. But getting into the slightly more meatier things, the next piece of tech that I want to show you is our warehouse app. This is an app that staff members in our warehouse literally use to check in new items that are arrived there, to perform all those functions like barcode scanning, inventory management, photography, etc. And yeah, there's quite a few features that are required, and the technology we chose, at least for now, to use to prove out our concept and to build something is called AppSheet. I'll be honest, I had no idea AppSheet existed before we started this startup, and I consider myself fairly well versed in Google technologies, but we discovered this along the way, and AppSheet is actually it says no code, but it's actually a low code development platform for responsive mobile, tablet, and web applications. And the app that we use in our warehouse now is built using AppSheet. So I'm going to run you through a little bit of how AppSheet looks and works, just to give you an idea, because this was all new to me when I first came across it, but it turned out to be pretty intuitive. I guess if you've done any kind of mobile development or software dev, or even just like product design overall, I personally found it to be fairly intuitive and nice to use. It all kind of starts with creating a new app in AppSheet. You can start with a few different options. So one of the options, sticking with the theme of these talks, is that you can start with Gemini. You can describe what your app needs to be in plain language, and it spits out a starter project for you to use and build upon. That isn't what we use, but it is an option for you. You can also start with templates. They've got this whole library of templates for sort of common use cases that you can use. So surveys, inventory management, project management tools like Kanban boards, team onboarding and training. There's a lot of things that they've almost like created templates for that you can start with as well. However, in the end, we kind of just went with starting with a blank app. That's also something you can do. You pick a category and then you basically just create a blank app, then you can go from there. The first things that you are hit with is that you need to sort of put in some basic information and decide on some basic theming options for your app. So here you can see we basically just put in a name, a short description, we choose categories, functions, etc. Just give some metadata about what the app is and what it's for. And simultaneously, you can choose some basic theming options. So things like brand colors, logos, splash screens, etc. And a few different style and font options that you can choose. It's all quite controlled, so you don't get full flexibility to do everything you want. Like, it is quite boxed in some ways, but for our purposes, we didn't really need to spend a hell of a lot of time on choosing exactly the right font and exactly the right colors and all the best UI. It just needed to work and achieve the business functions that we wanted to go out and improve. So then you are presented with some options of how your app should work from a performance side and whether or not it should be able to operate offline or not. So you kind of choose between 3 different options. So how basically your app syncs to the cloud and when and how these syncs need to happen. And also if you need to cache data or not. So you can basically choose between things like syncing on starts. You can have data have a delayed sync. You can have things update automatically. You get a few options to play around with. And in our case, we did actually want data to always just be up to date and for it to be as quick, as simple as possible for our staff members. You also get to choose whether the app is able to work offline or not, and whether or not any content from the app is stored offline and cached so that it can be fully used, even if there's an internet connection or not. Just going to point out that checking some checkboxes for these pieces of functionality is quite wild. Like actually achieving this in a full dev environment usually is quite a big task. So this is quite easy and simple out of the box to just have these quite fundamental choices made for you. So with those fundamental things in mind, this is what the general initial data and IDE looks like. Everything in AppSheet is basically based around this idea of structured, typical database-like data. So on the left, you have different data sources that you can import. One of them was actually our Google form. You can choose between things like Google Forms, Google Sheets, and then also, which I'll get to later, traditional databases called AppSheet databases. You can have a variety of these that you can use and pull from and use in your app. Then in the center here, you've got the data itself. So this is structured. You get, a variety of things like what type of data is it? Is it a key or a label? Is there a formula? Is it required? Is it editable? There's a bunch of things that you get to tweak for each row of each column of data in your database. On the right, you get a responsive app preview. So you get to flip between mobile, tablets, and even desktop/web view. And this is constantly updated as you tweak things in the data. It's fully interactive. So if you want to test something out or try something on the fly, it's basically instantaneous, which is pretty cool. To dive a little bit into those pieces of data that you saw, I'm just going to show you a few things that you get access to. So this is just an example of the items in our database which represent a piece of clothing. And each item has an ID. And this is something that is required. It's something that is a key and a label in our app. But you get access to quite a few things that you can change. So things like data validity. So in our case, we deal with quite a lot of barcodes in our website, in our warehouse. And we have different barcodes that deal with rails for clothing. We have different barcodes for sellers who send us stuff. We have barcodes for the items themselves. And we have different formats for each barcode that exists. So you can put in rules that allow you to check, is this a valid barcode? Is the text or the data that's back in this barcode what should be scanned or what shouldn't be? You can provide error messages. You can say it is required or it isn't. You also get to choose update behavior. So is this field actually editable or is it only readable? Furthermore, you can make something searchable within the app. You get basically search and filtering functionality across all your data in the app for free. And you can choose whether certain columns of data are searchable or not. And on top of that, you can do things like enable barcode scanning with the click of a checkbox, or choose something to be NFC scannable, or whether it's sensitive data or not, which does certain things around like basically protecting that data and not making it public. So there's really a lot that you can do. This is just like a touch on what's possible. Like all of these drop downs that you can see in the left enable quite a variety of things when you combine them and piece them all together. The next thing to speak about is views. So views, as the name would suggest, is this idea that you can create different views in your app that you can navigate to view the data that you have. So on the left here, you've got all the different views. And in our case, you can see we've made views for things like the items that we have at our warehouse, as well as the sellers. But then we've got others for a custom form, for adding items, for handling things like paying out sellers, for photographing items, etc., etc. You get a bunch of like pre-built system-generated views as well, which basically like from the data that you put into AppSheet are generated for you because it assumes that that's what you'll need to achieve basic functionality, but you don't have to use it. You then get to choose how that view looks, what general view type is it, where does it sit in the hierarchy of the app navigation. You can choose things like sorting, styling, etc. It's all pre-built, so you don't get to really do anything from scratch, but it does give you quite a wide variety of different options to pick from that suit quite a few use cases for things like, in our case, inventory management, taking photos, onboarding users, displaying charts, etc. The last thing to talk about, I guess, in the basic building blocks is actions. So actions is this idea that, okay, you've got your data, you've got your views, and then you need actions to sort of trigger things to happen in your app and to cause navigation events or to just have things, generally speaking, happen in the app. So over here, you can see that we've created lots of actions, things like adding a new item into our system, changing the physical location of an item, returning something, selling it, updating it, etc. You do get this action builder, which basically gives you the way to like identify what this action is, which data it affects, and then what type of action is it. And you get a variety of pre-built things like actions that affect the data in your database, or actions that do things in the app, like open another view or go back. You can then basically have things like, in this case, we've got an action which is to change the location, physical location that we record of where an item is. So it's setting one column in our database for a particular item, and yeah, that's what it does. So that's a little look at AppSheets and how it works in terms of like a visual low-code app builder. It's a bit of a shift in mindset for me coming from a purely code background, but it turned out to be quite intuitive. It had a lot of things out of the box. It suited pretty well, I guess, our use case for a warehouse inventory management primarily app. But yeah, your mileage may vary, but I was quite impressed. However, I did mention that there was this idea that you could pull in data from things like Google Forms and Google Sheets, but specifically that you can also use what's called AppSheet databases. So we actually use these to store the data for all of the items that we receive and all of the sellers who sign up with us. And this is really just an AppSheet specific first-party native data source for organizing and managing all of this data. So, and this typically will be what's auto-generated for you if you just make a new app in AppSheet. If you don't choose to specifically start with a Google Sheet or a form or something else, an AppSheet database will just be created for you. And these are also relatively simple, to be honest. It kind of looks like a slightly more stripped down databasey version of a Google Sheet, but you really just create databases, create tables within those databases, and then the columns have a bunch of pre-built types like text, photographs, enums, checkboxes, etc. So it gives you a bunch of like pre-built data types out of the box, and these are specifically designed to play really well with AppSheet itself because the type of data that you deal with in AppSheet affects the UI, it affects what's possible, like can it be scanned or not, can you trigger the camera to take a photo for that particular column or not. So it does play really nicely with AppSheet itself. So yeah, as I said, up here, these are all of the tables. So you can see in our case, we've got items as our primary table, but items have things like categories, conditions, reasons why they failed quality checks. So you can create sub-tables for yourself to keep track of things like that. And then you've got all your rows and columns over here. It's worth noting that AppSheet relies on this data. Apps can update this, read from it, delete, etc. But you can also come in and visually edit the database directly here, remove, add rows, change columns and stuff as almost like an admin privilege. Okay, so we've had a look at AppSheet, which is our warehouse app. Had a look at the AppSheet database, which is used to store all of our sellers and our items, which that data is pulled into the AppSheet app itself. One of the other functions that we offer, and one of the things about Thrif is that the whole idea is that you send us your things that you don't want, and we do all of the listing and photography and put it up online for sale for you so that you don't have to. It's a convenient service. And we, with this app, have been basically using it to snap photos and create listings of our items, we do all of that, and our staff members do that. So we had to sort of think, okay, are we going to do all of this manually? Are we going to be putting in every title, every description, every condition, color, brand, etc., all of the bits and pieces and metadata that I guess an item online for sale needs? Or can we reach for something like AI to assist us with that? So that's actually what we ended up doing. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of how we did that, how we integrated it with AppSheet. And it actually all plays quite nicely together. The two bits of technology we use for this are AppScript. This is a cloud-based JavaScript platform that Google offers. It's kind of powered by Google Drive, and that it integrates with all the Google Workspace products that you get. So things like Drive, Docs, Gmail, etc. It has out-of-the-box classes and things for you to do things with that. And then we also ended up using the Gemini API, which is just basically Google's generative AI SDK. Let's have a look at that. So first, to show you what AppScript looks like, this is the script editor, and these are what sort of executions of these scripts looks like. It's basically like a stripped down, just straight up script editor where you can just define functions there and there. You can run them, debug them, you can check out executions, you can see where things failed or why not. There's a log. It's not that unfamiliar, but it is quite simple, and it's really, really easy to get up and running. And you can see here on the, bottom right, you can see how executions show you that certain functions that run, like what happened, what was logged, did it fail, did it not, how long did it take, when did it happen. Pretty handy. So the first thing, now that you know about what AppScript is, because I'm going to show you how we use AppScript to actually create a function that hooks into the AppSheet app, which calls the Gemini API and does this whole listing process for us. But in order to even start anyway, we actually need to create a Gemini API key in Google's AI Studio. So this is what this looks like. It's pretty easy. You create an API key. In there, it gives you some basic usage on how to do that. And that's how we initially started. And yeah, you can see at the bottom here, there's a bit of the details, it's still on the free plan. I'll get into pricing and all that later, but yeah, quite simple. And then it came down to actually using this and defining a function in AppScript that allows us to achieve the listing thing that we wanted to do. Just gonna pause here briefly and say that the main function of this was to allow us to list items for sale online faster. And the general idea was, if I can take a photo of a secondhand item, the front, the back, the label, I should be able to get all the information that I need to categorize that item and list it for sale online. So that's actually what we're going to use Gemini for. The first thing you do is create or define your Gemini API key. You actually store it in your script properties, which is basically just like a bunch of constants. So we ended up having our Gemini API key there, and then we just use Gemini's standard endpoints and choose a model, in our case 2.0 Flash, and specify our API key there. We then had to define a function to basically run any Gemini query. We did like separate the AppSheet specific function and just something that can run a Gemini query overall, and accept a general text prompt, some image file bytes, as well as a temperature. A temperature is basically how creative the model should be. We didn't really want it to be that creative. We just wanted to like look at a piece of clothing and say, that is an Adidas t-shirt and it should cost this much. Don't tell us it's something else, please, because it does go a bit crazy sometimes. So yeah, it started by defining this function. We then were able to, we actually did something in the beginning where we could like attach multiple files to a prompt, whether they be images, whether they be CSV files or otherwise. And in our case, we actually have a CSV file which defines a bunch of brands, categories, prices, some structured data so that Gemini has something to go on when we wanted to pick from a discrete set of options. What's cool is that in AppScript, you get these, as I mentioned, out-of-the-box classes like Drive app to just fetch a file from Google Drive with one line of code. Pretty cool. We then started by defining the payload parts. So these are all the bits and pieces that you attach to the actual API payload that you send to the Gemini API. So in our case, we started with that CSV file of structured data. It's really just as well as the text prompt. So this is just basically saying, cool, this is our prompt, and this is our attachment, which is a CSV file, and we pass through the data that we got from Drive and convert it into bytes. The next thing we do is we actually attach the images that we have in the function params. We also convert those into bytes separately, but those all get attached as images, and those get attached to the payload parts as well. Then, once we've got all these parts, we can define the payload itself. So that's that map of payload parts, which is our CSV file, our prompt, as well as our images. We do specify a config with our temperature, which is set to 0 and not 1. And then we also define our, like, what is this API call going to look like? We do want our content type to be JSON. We want to be posting. And then we really just like converts our payload into a JSON string. Here you can see that this is the sort of general format for actually calling the API. So again, as part of the AppScript built-in classes, you get this URL fetch app, which allows you to call any kind of URL, provided a payload. And we have this Gemini provision endpoint that we defined as a constant before. And we've got our options and our payload, and we basically just like call this API and return the results. With that in mind, we now have a general function that we can use to call the Gemini API, passing through attachments like a CSV file, a text prompt, and some images. We now wanted to create a function that we can use to actually connect to AppSheet. And I'm going to show you how that works in AppSheet, but first we actually need to define the function. So this is our post to Gemini API function. It has an ID for the item that we're specifically dealing with for our database, and it has a list of photos. The use case here is someone in our warehouse walks up to an item, snaps 3 to 6 photos of an item, they click OK, and these photos all get sent to the Gemini API. The Gemini API does its thing, and all of the details for that item, its brand, its color, its size, its condition, its suggested price, all of that then comes back asynchronously so that we have a listing ready to go and publish on our website when it's done. And that typically takes like a few minutes, to be honest. But let's have a look. So the first thing we need is our prompt. I'm not sharing that with you because that is kind of our secret sauce. That's like how we get Gemini to do its thing. In a nutshell, it's us effectively instructing Gemini to inspect the images that we give it as well as the structured data that we give it with all of our brands and all of that, and to pull out the information that we need in a structured way in a format that we know how to deal with. So I mentioned that we have these like image file bytes in the previous function. In order to go from AppSheet format to format that Gemini is okay with receiving, i.e. a path of an image in Drive to bytes, there's a bit of code here. It effectively is just fetching files from Drive, converting that into basically image bytes, and then storing that in an array. Here you go, you can see that we actually use that function that we defined before, the run Gemini query. We've got our prompts, we've got our image file bytes. We then receive a response, which is split by the semicolons, which has all of the data that we need. And then we have our output, which we can then split into things like our name, our description, our price. I know I didn't show you the text prompt, but effectively, yeah, we're asking for all of these bits and pieces of information about an item in the photo, or a set of photos, actually. Lastly, at the end of that, once you've got the output from Gemini, you have two options. So basically, what you can do is you can either return the outputs, and I'm going to show you next how you can deal with that output in AppSheet and do something with it in the visual editor. Alternatively, AppSheet actually has an API. So if you want to update a record for a table in your AppSheet database, you can do that via the AppSheet API, and that will basically instantly reflect the changes in your app that we see in our warehouse or on your database that you're busy watching. I'm not going to go into too much details about the API itself, but basically it allows you to add, delete, read, update, invoke actions even in AppSheet as well. There's a bunch of stuff you can just basically do programmatically instead of having to do it, manually via the app itself. So just to demonstrate how we then connected the functions I just defined in AppScript using the Gemini API to AppSheet, I need to tell you about something called AppSheet automations. These are pretty cool. These are effectively bots that you can define to do a variety of things when certain events happen. So these events can be timed events. They can be events that happen in the app, like the status of something changes or there's some kind of data change. On the left here, you can see that we've actually defined a few bots, things for publishing, things for photography, when items are updated, when items are sold. But the one I'd like to show you now, which is related to what we've been speaking about, is this drafting bot. You can see here in the visual builder that we've got this event that happens when the status of an item changes from photograph to photograph edited. We've got a separate process, which I haven't spoken about and really isn't necessary for the topic of this talk, but items are photographed and they go through an automatic touch-up photo editing process. When that happens, it's time for that item to run through Gemini and have all of those listing details generated. So we set up an event to say, cool, when an item actually enters photo edited status, it's time to call that script. So you can see here that we've also got like these settings on the right, which really just define like what type of event is this, like what table or which data is it coming from, what type of data change event should happen, and what conditions. But I'm mostly concerned with the idea to connect to AppScript. You can see, I guess, in the previous slide here, that there's this little call Gemini script process at the bottom. I'm going to show you how that works. So in order to connect to AppScript, this call Gemini API script is basically a process that you can run. And there's a variety of types of processes that you get. So you can do things like send a push notification, send an email, call a webhook, even create files and do that kind of thing. But a really cool thing is that you can actually call an AppScript script. So again, we sort of like under the whole umbrella of Google technologies, all work well together, obviously. And what you end up doing really is you call a script, you choose what script file you'd like to have, so which functions to pull. You then specifically select the function. So in our case, we had that post to Gemini API function. You then choose the function parameters. And basically what you're saying is from my AppSheet data, pass these to the function that we've defined in AppScript. Pretty cool. You can even do things like, it doesn't have to be directly from that column and that specific piece of data. You can even do formulas and like have if conditions, etc. And then you choose basically whether you should return the outputs and handle the return in the editor itself, or you can have the function run asynchronously, and then it operates in the background and you can continue using the app. There is this new thing, which is it's quite new. It's only available on quite expensive plans of AppSheet, but there's AI tasks, which may end up replacing everything I've just showed you, to be honest. But effectively, this is just like Google entering now and saying, okay, cool, we know people want to use Gemini and its capabilities in AppSheet. We're going to provide an easy visual code builder way to do this. It's not yet available for everyone, so I guess you might have to update your if or when that happens. But for now, yeah, we're not using it. We are, however, getting around it by using AppScript and the Gemini API. The last thing I want to show you, one of the last things I want to show you, is this idea of a seller dashboard. Really, this was just us using AppSheet again to quickly create another app which is used for people who are sellers to log in and to view the status of their items. We have two apps. We have one that we use internally for our staff and our warehouse to like check in items, take photos, manage the inventory, and do stuff that really is just like only really concerned with our internal business processes. But because we sell items on behalf of other people, we needed a public-facing version of this, which still shows the same data, the items, the seller's details, but really to hide most of that and only show them what they need to see. At first, we considered maybe merging it into one big super app and hiding, showing things depending on what the user's privileges are. But it turned out to be honest, a bit hectic. So we just ended up making two AppSheet apps. It was actually really fast. And in this case, our seller dashboard is really just one of those and slightly dumbed down from what we saw before. So in this case as well, with our internal app, we have a discrete set of users using this. We've got 2 warehouse staff members at the moment. We might have more. We've got 6 employees in total, so we can really control who accesses that internal app or not. But in the case of a public-facing seller dashboard where we could have anyone who signed up with us be able to access it, we needed to change the security settings of that app. And you could do that pretty easily in AppSheet. So you can basically decide whether or not you need users to sign in to this AppSheet app in order to access it or not. You can choose authentication providers, so they provide a bunch of out-of-the-box things like signing with Google, Microsoft Outlook, Apple iCloud, etc. And then crucially, there's this idea of allowing all signed-in users or not. So you can either have a set list of people who can access this app, or you can allow anyone to do it, assuming they sign in. And then you can do certain things in the app depending on like the user's email address or their account privileges. So it effectively allows you to then just share the app, and then for people who are accessing this for the first time, they have to sign in using one of the providers. The out-of-the-box providers are a bit odd when you go past the third one, like Dropbox, Smartsheet, Box, Salesforce. Not really sure, but at least it covers the major ones, Google, Microsoft, and Apple. So to wrap up, I just want to recap some of the things we basically got for free and were able to do really fast, which in the case of a scrappy startup, mostly trying to prove out their business model and not really their tech stack, these are the things. We got syncing and offline support. We've got fully responsive UX UI. We've got data validation, photo capture, integration with a bunch of other Google products, versioning and deployment, which I didn't even touch on, automations, basically a backend as well. It turned out to be surprisingly easy and very quick for us to prototype something that should be quite complex to build in most cases. So just to point that out. But I'll put it in inverted commas for free because Nothing is for free. There are pricing and limitations to these things, hence why it's my opinion that this is a great tool for prototyping something, but if this is going to be something you're going to use at massive scale, you may want to think about building something custom. But hopefully at that stage, you've proved the concept, you've raised some funding, you have a bigger team. But anyway, let's take a look at the pricing and limitations, the boring stuff to end off of AppSheet. So it's actually free to explore and use with up to 10 users. So you can go and check out AppSheet today. You can build something, play around. You won't get charged. There are 3 plan options after you exceed 10 users. There's Starter, which is then billed per user per month. There's Core, and this is actually already included in your Google Workspace plan if you have one. So you don't have to pay extra if you already have Google Workspace. And then there's the big Enterprise Plus, which is like once you get to a point where, okay, maybe you do want to use this at scale, you can upgrade. There's limits to the databases themselves. These are very important to be aware of. And I do believe that like eventually we're going to run into some of these issues, but we haven't yet. AppScript is free completely. Doesn't matter. Like there's no tiers or anything there, but there are quotas and limitations that affect things like your script runtime, the size of the URL fetches, the lengths, etc. I've added links here and I'll share these slides afterwards. There's quite a lot to go through. And then the Gemini API. There is a free tier, which we're still using, which has lower rate limits for testing purposes. And then you can upgrade to a paid tier, which has higher rate limits, extra features, and it also handles data differently. These are calculated in like per 1 million tokens in USD, and the pricing actually differs depending on which model you use, whether it's like 2.5 Pro or 2.0 Flash. The pricing, yeah, is definitely worth looking at if you're going to be using it, but you can at least play around with it for free, and all of these things for free actually, if you'd like to. Thank you. That was that. And were there any questions? Yes.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I think you might have touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to understand the AppSheet databases. Is it possible to use that as just a data source in any other application, or is it always tied to AppSheet?
So you can repeat the question for the case.
Yeah. So that's a good question, actually. The question is basically like, is an AppSheet database suitable to use as a general data source outside of just using it with AppSheet? In my opinion, not really. I did mention that there's an API for reading, writing, updating AppSheet databases, but that actually flows. You can almost imagine it flowing through the AppSheet app first. So there in that AppSheet app, you've defined things like data validity rules, you've defined things like things that could fail. And so not really, to be honest. One of the options that you can use with, another option with AppSheet is to literally use a Google Sheet. Not sure, that's like obviously has its own limitations and issues. But an AppSheet database, to be honest, is mostly good for using with AppSheet directly. Anyone else? Yep.
In terms of PII, personal identifiable information.
Yep.
We didn't handle that in terms of data validation.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's. Yeah. So the question is like, on this idea that you can flag a particular column in your database in your AppSheet app as personally identifiable information, PII, and how that works. It's, as far as I know, it's basically like you can check an item, like let's say email address, bank account number, something like that. You can flag it as PII, and I think that adds some level of extra encryption to the data. If I'm not mistaken. I need to check that, but it is there at least, and basically it's like highly encouraged, and it even picks it up for you. Like if a column is named email address, it automatically like selects it and says this probably should be PII.
So here's a question from online. It says, does this generate any source code and how is versioning handled?
Okay, so the question is, does it generate any source code? No. Versioning, though, on the other hand, is a very good question. To be honest, probably should have touched on that. But there is, you can basically have your app be in prototype state in AppSheet, or you can be in deployed state. In prototype state, you're just playing around, building, whatever. But once you're in deployed state, you can start basically versioning your app and then rolling out versions and have items like versions of your app, be it like at head or whether your like certain users should have like version 1 point whatever. So you can basically do versioning once your app's in the deployed state. You can roll out, there's different options for that.
How do you deal with hallucinations? For example, your items, double checking that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess because AppSheet is so like structured, so predictable, so like visual builder, once we entered Gemini land, things started, we had to bug fix and test quite a bit. Truthfully, we haven't fully got around it, but we've managed to curb it as much as we can by adjusting our prompt to a point where it's as clear as we can get it. We've even asked for assistance from Gemini on the prompt itself. We set that temperature value to 0 because that means that it doesn't go too crazy. And then the other thing that I showed you where we attach the CSV file of structured data of like discrete options that it can pick from has also allowed us to avoid that. So it's just like a variety of things to just say, please Gemini, just pick the brand from this list. If it isn't, like just go with an empty string. And even then, like we've had some odd cases where an extra comma or an extra semicolon is thrown and we're like, okay, I don't know why that happened. But I guess in those cases we have had to put in, like failure handling, like what happens if there's an error. We've even had to do some automation things with regards to like retrying if a step failed, letting us know, etc. So yeah, there's a few checks and balances in place, but it's not 100% avoidable, unfortunately. Yeah.
This might be a business question also, but how I understand the use of the seller sheet,
Yep.
the form that they create,
Yep.
they list the price that they want to sell something for, but then how do you combat like someone saying that this Zara t-shirt is 10,000 rand or something?
Yeah. So the question is like, I guess the general question is like the relationship between people are becoming a seller on our platform and what interaction they have with us to, I guess, provide details. Our ethos is like to make it as simple as possible. So the initial form they fill in, which I didn't show you all the details, but it's mostly just personal details, how are we collecting from you, how are we paying you out, and that's it. And then thereafter, we just basically receive a box of their stuff and we handle almost everything. But while it's not currently something we do in AppSheet, it's fully our intention to allow users to interact and like contest with like a price that we set or mostly actually on pricing, to be honest. The rest, like a brand is a brand. If it isn't, it's like one or zero kind of thing. But for opinionated stuff, we have experimented with allowing users to like contest things, like suggest edits. Yeah.
Thanks. Yes, just on the deployment, is it just web apps or can you deploy like Android?
Yeah. So the question is on deployment, is it just web apps or is there also like native mobile, Android and iOS? Also a very good question. So you do get a web app out of the box, but you also get native Android, iOS, mobile. It all runs through, it's actually an AppSheet app that you basically will have to either download or are prompted to download from the App Store or the Play Store. And within that, you have like an app gallery where you can see all the apps that you have been given access to or you own. And those, as I understand it, like that housing app has all the like native components in it. And then the one that you deploy effectively just runs as a like that as its container, basically. But it does feel like a native app, I must say. It's pretty snappy and performance is good and responsive and all of that. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of scalability, do you mind elaborating, like which parts specifically? Yeah. For me, I see it more as a way to rapidly prototype something. Like going back to the original intention, we had a pretty complex business idea, one that required lots of moving parts, requires people in a warehouse with an app, it requires people signing up via form, it requires people sitting at home watching whether their items sell or not and choosing what to do. All of that like really could warrant like a full-fledged backend, like multiple native apps, possibly. Yeah, a lot more complexity and build time than we had in the beginning to just like quickly put something together, prove out our concept, show that people are signing up, people are selling through us, people are buying. I personally see it as a way to prove out a concept up to a stage. And if you get to that stage and you're perhaps able to convince an investor or prove out your concept or grow a team or whatever, then yeah, it's just to be frank, it's our intention not to stick with this forever. Like we will build our custom platform, we will use something a bit more scalable in time, but while we do the variety of other things that comes with the startup, like, you know, managing finances, employees, and all of the above, like it's actually been quite a breeze to just quickly build, quickly maintain, keep things running while we're proving it out. And yeah, but to your question, I mean, there are examples that AppSheet gives of like this operating at big scale. I don't know if I would, maybe, but let's see.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Yeah, actually another question.
Sure.
It's another follow-up on my previous question.
Yeah.
Do you have like human in the loop, or is it fully automated, this whole identifying item process?
So what we actually do is because we have trust issues with Gemini, thanks to the hallucinations you mentioned. No, but what we do is we have humans effectively like using the AppSheet app at the warehouse to just check in items. So scan a barcode on that item, register it in our database, and then snap the photos of the item on the phone. So the front, the back, the label with the size, the label with the wash care. Those photos then run through that script I show you and it generates the listing. But it was our choice to add an extra step to basically approve that listing to go live on our store. So there is just that like human step to say, have a quick look through it, like, did Gemini actually get the brand right? Is the price like reasonable? We do have an intern who's like a fashion student who basically we pay her to look through all of the listings that Gemini generates and just amend or edit things before clicking OK and it goes live for sale. So maybe we'll eventually fully automate it to a point where we won't need that, but at this early stage, we're seeing how it goes, and we did want to just have that last check to be like, okay, if it's really not correct, then let's not have, you know, junk stuff just coming onto our website that we don't have any control over.
Yeah, I still think there should be a human in the
Yeah.
loop.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Anyone else? Anyone else? Sure.
There's something asking out of curiosity. So,
Yeah.
like if you've tried to use a Gemini to set the price for the item, do you wash the item or iron it first before you take the pictures, or just check out of the box? And is it able to calculate the prices?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. It's getting into like the real. Oh yeah. So the question is like, I guess, how do we like what sort of items do we accept, and like what are the quality of the photos that we end up taking, such that Gemini can like look at them and like suggest a price. We have, and this is more of a business thing, but we have quite a high bar of quality. Like if something arrives at our warehouse and it hasn't been washed, or it's stained, or it's damaged or something, we don't accept it. Like it needs to be in good condition and needs to be washed. We do actually do a steam of an item prior to photography, and then that we think provides both good product photos and also photos that are good enough for Gemini to inspect and look at and go like, okay, cool, like I can tell what the brand is, like, and I can reasonably say what the condition of this is according to what it looks like. So if everything came through like creased and crumpled and like damaged, like, yeah. Well, firstly, I don't know if we have a very good business, and secondly, I'm not sure what Gemini would say. So yes.
Can you maybe share an example of the product listing so we can see what Gemini
Yeah, that's
Sure.
actually a good idea.
Okay, I'm gonna have to. It's actually share a different window if you don't mind. So bear with me.
This is an brand. Okay.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
new tab or a new window.
Yeah, I'm just gonna find which one it's in. Okay.
So the question is whether
Okay. So yeah, you can see that.
yeah, it's fine.
So actually in AppSheet now, this is actually something quite cool. So you can see we've got like basically a list of items here that are live. Scroll down, I guess let's find this one. So this is an item which is currently live on the website. Yeah, it's got its ID, it's got its quality check image, it's got its images that we actually took in the warehouse, which have its their photo, like the background removed, photos of the labels, and then things like descriptions, categories, subcategories, brands, materials, even sizes, as well as retail price. All of this stuff actually came from Gemini, so none of this we put in manually. We do check it and amend things if necessary. But when it actually gets onto the website, it looks like this. So here you can see, I guess, the listing on the website. It has its size, its conditions, until when it's available. Has all the photos as well. And if we actually go to the main page of the website, I guess you'll see a bunch of additional items. You can see all these have been going live over the past few days. These are all just like, yeah, photos taken on a mobile phone from our warehouse, details generated by Gemini, tags. Yeah, that's it. Good question. I think there was another one over here.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, do you have any delegation limits on your database? So you store like you do.
Sorry, yeah, no, I'm just
So
still
like
listening.
the number of rows that you have in your database.
Yes.
Do you have any delegation limits there on like you sort or search?
So there are some limits actually with an AppSheet database. I'm just gonna share that again. Let's see if I can find that. So where do I have this? It's somewhere. Yeah, here you go. So there are limits depending on the plan that you have with AppSheet. And this is also, to be honest, I think one of the key reasons why scalability, like the question at the back, was a good one. But there certainly are limits. They're fairly minimal actually until you get to this enterprise plus plan when things just like, yeah, then you can really go ham. But yeah, there's fairly strict limits to begin with. Yep.
Probably another business question, but
Are you trying to steal some ideas and go? Sorry, no.
No, it's all good.
so the pictures you've taken at the warehouse,
Yeah.
Some things get sent away or not used or not listed. Is there an idea that, some users can take pictures themselves? Maybe they won't be up to the standard that you take in the warehouse. Take some of the work away and you don't accept, the things that you don't want.
Yeah. So there's two real models, business models when it comes to this like secondhand resale, let's call it. There's peer-to-peer. So if you ever use something like Yaga, like you have the thing, you take the photo of the thing, you get the order, you fulfill the order, you write the description, all that stuff, and then you ship it to the buyer. It's the middleman really is just a software platform. In our case, we specifically decided to choose this managed model where we think it's solving the major pain points for people trying to buy and sell secondhand. So for a seller, time, convenience, like just take my stuff, like cool, you do the work. And then for buyers, that there's a consistent experience, that it's safe, it's secure, etc. And it is actually quite tricky to do that with people like in a peer-to-peer model. Perhaps you have a point like taking photos, just the taking photos part could be something that we outsource. We are exploring like outsourcing it to businesses at the moment because they are a little bit more controlled, businesses with stock overflow. But yeah, it's early days, so who knows? Startups change almost every day, so could be. Yeah.
So I'm curious, right? Let's say as a buyer, I buy a t-shirt or platform.
Yeah.
How do you manage the delivery of the item?
Yeah, so the question is like, how do we manage logistics, I guess, in general? So we actually use Pudo. It's nationwide, it's cheap. They have an API, which we're not using just yet, but we will soon. And it just kind of means that like if someone wants to sell with us, we can get a package from, I don't know, like Limpopo delivered to our warehouse in Cape Town for like 59 Rand. And then similarly, if you're a buyer and you want something delivered like from our warehouse to you, same sort of pricing model. It's pretty reliable. It's not the fastest necessarily, but in this model and in this sort of industry, I guess price is king. So yeah, we use that. And I guess when you do checkouts on our websites, or when you fill in the seller form or you check out on our website, you specify some address details that we know how to get stuff from you or to you. George.
How did you integrate payments into AppSheet?
Okay, so the question is, how do we integrate payments into AppSheet? We didn't. There's only payments on our e-commerce website at the moment. We use something called Stitch Express. There's a variety of options for that. That's a hot space, to be honest. So you're not short there. We chose the Stitch Express because like in the early days, before we had any app sheets or whatever, we were literally trying to prove this out over like WhatsApp, Instagram, super alpha MVP vibes, and Stitch Express offered payment links. But yeah, we do use them on our e-commerce website, and as it is worth noting that also have an API. So who knows? Yes.
I'm just curious, how do you make money from this? Because I think you are losing more money than gaining.
That's a good question. So the business model, and I'm liking that most of the questions are business related because but the business model itself is strictly on a consignment model. So we don't pay for any logistics. So if you're a seller, you cover the logistics fees to get your stuff to us. If you're a buyer, you pay for the delivery fee, pretty standard. And any items that come to us stay with us for 30 days. And in that time, we need to list them and get them online for sale fast. Hence, we built all of this. And if anything sells, we take a 50% commission for most items. If it's an expensive item, we take 30%. So we share basically the cost, the amount made with the seller. But it's still a complex one to get right. Like marketplaces are quite tough. I guess one thing we've been surprised by is that there's no shortage of people with stuff lying around they don't want and with no time to actually do anything with it. So supply is good, but getting people to buy and use a new platform, especially an online e-commerce platform, is where the tricky part is. But yeah, with time and with a bit of extra cash, like it works. Yeah.
I have a question. Let's say I would like to return a product. Do you return it to the seller, or in that situation, how do you solve it?
Another good question.
No, just about the accidents.
Questions on returns. So firstly, if you're selling stuff through us, upfront, you get to choose, because it's consignment, like related to her question, we don't buy anything from you and we don't own any of the stuff that you sent us. It's still technically yours until it sells to someone else. But in some cases, people send us stuff and firstly, we are quite clear about the fact that we can't necessarily sell all of your items. It's not guaranteed. In fact, in general, we typically tend to sell like 30 to 40% of a package that arrives with us. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But with that in mind, as a seller, you get to choose, should any unsold items be returned to me after the consignment period? Again, you cover the logistics fee to get it back to you. Or can we recycle/donate it for free on your behalf? And that's this idea that like we're trying to be circular. We're trying to make sure that even if an item comes to us, it doesn't pass a quality check or doesn't sell, it at least doesn't go to waste. But if you're a buyer, we do want to make the experience of buying feel like you're buying from a Bash or Superbus or something. So we do offer returns. And there's like a little bit of a decision-making tree depending on what the seller chose. Like if the item is returned to us and it's still in its consignment period, it goes live for sale again. If it's not, it then needs to be returned to the seller or recycled or donated. So there's like a bit of a complicated but I guess predictable tree there.
All right, we have time for just 2 more questions. And I prefer the questions to be one technical, because this is meant to be technical, and then perhaps one just business or something. So who's technical here? Who's technical here? You can go first. Really?
Follow-up.
All right, sure, no problem.
So let's say I'm selling, right?
Yeah.
And my item doesn't sell.
Yeah.
And obviously I have to pay for it to get returned.
Yeah.
Is there an option for me to like extend maybe on the side to keep it for that money?
We have considered this. In fact, we have done it in the past where we've offered sellers to extend because we feel that the quality of their stock is good enough. But it's something we have actively considered to allow people to like purchase extensions. Thanks for the reminder. Probably need to look into that.
All right, the last question. If you have any other question after, you can always approach him. Yes, who has the last question?
I was just a follow-up question. He was asking about taking the pictures. What's the product still with the seller? Now I've got a similar business model that we use.
Yeah.
If someone sends the product, then they come to your warehouse, you take pictures, realize, no, we can't sell this product. Now you have to return. What's the seller already paid for the delivery?
Yeah.
So maybe just for the seller not to lose that money for the delivery and maybe end up saying, okay, I don't want the product. donate to charity or whatsoever.
Yeah.
Maybe if the seller can take the pictures first, then you say, okay, it seems like something that we can resell. Then they can take it back there. From there, you can take it at the next step so that at stage of
Yeah, it's tough because like depending on how you do this affects how you can scale. So the more effort you put on people looking to sell, possibly the less likely you have people signing up. And then additionally, you also need to have people checking those photos and looking at it and saying like, yes, we could. I mean, maybe Gemini could do that eventually. I don't know. But truthfully, we found it to be simplest for people just to like have minimal details, send us the package. We provide them with very detailed guidelines up front, say, this is the brands we can sell. It must be in this condition. If not, it's our prerogative. Like that's the choice. And most of the time, people stick to it. We still get people sending us like, one random sock. And we're like, okay, thanks. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. But it's a tricky one to have like this back and forth thing, because then if you think about it, like with one seller, 10 sellers, fine. 1,000 sellers, it becomes pretty crazy. So you almost like, we've learned through doing this that the more automated, the less hands-on, and just rather like have a standard process as things arrive, like is the best for us. And on top of that, like part of our mission is to make sure that something happens to these items, even if they're not great. So we do have a recycling donation partner. If it goes to them, then it goes to them. We do try and optimize space in our warehouse and all that stuff. So yeah, it's tricky, it's complex, but there's probably stuff we can do to improve.
All right, let's give him a round. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.